this notion, this third stage of discerning the middle way of non-duality. And one of the things that we tried to do in our meditation tonight was to have you at least drop in for a moment to the experience of holding multiple things at once. I don't know how that felt for you, but this sense of holding an awareness of this physical body while also holding an awareness of breath, while also holding an awareness of senses, while also holding an awareness of awareness itself. And what we're doing here is this is not necessarily supposed to be terribly easy. We're not used to this. We're used to focusing on one thing at a time. Yeah. Uh, Certainly in my work as an academic, on part of what I do, it's like narrow your argument down to an hourglass. You start with a large context when you write, you bring it into the focus of what is your thesis, and then your conclusion should come back out and sort of be relevant to kind of the context that you began with. Yeah, so it's sort of the hourglass thing, and in the middle is where the good stuff is, right? That's the thesis, that's the argument. But here, this sense of holding this open, this fullness of presence, this is ultimately one of the things that ideally we may experience once in a while in our practice until we're able to integrate this into our lives more regularly, off the cushion. This notion that Longchenpa tells us that freedom is unitary, so multiplicity is consumed, right? That's part of the reading that we have. Um, Freedom is unitary. This is really speaking to non-duality, right? We often are caught between one side or another side of a polarity. And just, watch your mind throughout the course of the day. you know, One minute there's a sense of loss, the next minute there is either a sense of gain or a need for gain. One minute there's pain, another minute there's kind of, hopefully there's some pleasure there. But you see these cycles that continue. Thinking of one thing as good, another as bad. This person is someone pleasurable to be with. This person is not somebody I want to be around. Am I successful enough? Am I a failure in what I'm doing with my life? Yeah, we're just these polarities that we live by. All of us do. Yeah, we're not alone in any of these dualities. And largely, this is this cycle of samsara, what's called this cycle of being born, attending to life, suffering, the suffering of change, of impermanence. When we have things we like, we end up tending to lose them or they change on us. And something we don't like, it seems like it's there forever and never goes away, but eventually it does. Um, we're so caught in that cycle. And one of the things about our practice, whether it's mindfulness or shamatha, which is calm abiding through sustained voluntary attention. Um, Perhaps it's a compassion meditation or loving kindness, is that we are seeking to sort of bring the mind in some way into a much fuller way of relating to whatever is coming, whatever is arising. And so this sense of fullness is largely the heart of freedom attending to reality, that we're not attending to things as they arise just through one narrow channel of thinking or one perceptual field, but rather with the fullness of a presence that holds all of it. We may not want to hold all of it. I know that I don't. When I'm watching what's happening, for example, in the Supreme Court, I'm not okay with it. And but so what? What can I do with this besides cast my vote? There is a whole nother side that is relishing in it. And it's so easy to get caught in the duality of it, that I'm over here and they're over here. How many of us feel that way about maybe not this issue around abortion, but really anything that's happening, uh, other things in the world? The point here is that freedom in that situation is really about finding a middle path that goes beyond the polarity. And some of you have heard me teach about this technique called triangles that I learned from my teacher, Leslie. It's a marvelous technique of processing dualism and finding the heart of your practice to be this middle state, this non-dual state. So what on earth does this look like? Something that I used to practice with. When I was younger, I had terrible anxiety that I just couldn't seem to get rid of. It would show up in the form of panic attacks. Fear of heights was a big problem for a long time, even though I grew up on airplanes, largely moving constantly and traveling a lot with my family. It was terrifying to fly. And I would just grip, kind of white knuckle my way through flights. I don't do that anymore. I've actually made amazing progress with that, and practice has been immeasurably helpful, coming into an entirely different way of living and perceiving. So it is possible to do. Um, and so for me, working with fear was a big one. And when I met Leslie, my longtime teacher, who still is, even though she doesn't teach anymore, um, working with fear and learning, okay, what is the opposite of that fear? What will make the fear feel better? And so I sat with this and I was like, okay, fear, the opposite of that for me, the thing that reconciles it is trust. So I realized trust was an important part here. It wasn't just fear and peacefulness. Yeah, it could have been that. But it really, the heart of the matter, the positive state was trust. And so practicing with fear and trust is great. Yeah. Here we have a state that's uncomfortable, and then we also have a state that ideally makes the fear better. But I'm still in this polarity. I'm still in this dualistic framework where I don't want the fear and I do want the trust. And still in the cycle because I can't always feel trust, but I'm not also always going to feel the fear. And so part of, I think, the brilliance of this technique of triangles is Leslie would then have us think about do basically journaling and writing and say, what is the ascended state? What is the state that I call sort of the middle state or the non-dual state that really is the heart of the matter here? Um, that can take time to kind of sit with and say, okay, what reconciles these opposites? Yeah. What is it that negates this polarity altogether? And for me, it was surrender. Once I learned what is at the heart of my biggest issue is not to control life, which is what anxiety for me was. It was just feeling lack of control over everything and feeling vulnerable and all of that, to needing trust and to feel strong and confident. It was about surrendering and being okay with that. And so that's what I brought into my practice. And so then she would have us practice with whatever that is. It's different for everyone. There is no formula to any of this, but the technique itself was very helpful. And essentially, what we were practicing was learning how to find a state that is the non dual heart of the matter for us. For me, surrender was important. There were others that I practiced with, such as what's another one? Well, uh, I'm forgetting them now, but anger, I think, oh, so there was one around anger. The opposite of that for me, um, gosh, I'm forgetting all those things now. It's been so long. Anger, joy, and that's great, but still caught in the polarity. Ultimately, the middle state, the non-dual state for me was acceptance. Yeah. It's a wonderful technique. We can do a workshop around this together sometime in the near future if you're interested. Um, it really is kind of a way to break through in your practice if you're really looking for a way to deepen it. And I have kind of put this together with breathing. And I remember talking to Leslie saying, I've been doing this with breathing that has been really helpful for me to like breathe in this case, trust, breathe out fear in the form of smoke, dark cloud, breathe it out all the way out until it disappears, breathe back in a sense of trust. Great. The polarity, practicing with what I'm calling polarity breathing. And then once I learned that surrender was really the heart of the matter, I breathe in surrender and then breathing out release into surrender. And this became my way of practicing with breath and these three kind of states, this triangle state. Anyway, the point here really is that if we're in a world of turbulence, if we're feeling really hot and charged about something that many of us are, whether it's something that is societal or something in our personal lives where there may be a disagreement, is to not just be content with taking a position, this versus that, or an oppositional standpoint. Sometimes we have to, yeah, on the public's, protest movements and all of that. And yet, we also want to take it a step further in our own ability to metabolize what we're feeling about these issues by seeking the middle way between the differences. It doesn't negate that there are differences at all. Diversity is a huge part of what makes humanity just flourish, I think. But it's also, what is there between that is the point of practice. So that we're not stuck. We're not stuck cycling between these dualities. Does that make sense? After all, this was the Buddha's main teaching of the middle path. The extremes are not helpful. He practiced extreme excess, which I imagine probably were the tantric practices where you just indulge in everything, learn how to basically work with um, your attachments and your addictions. That didn't work for him. I can't imagine that working for many of us. And then extreme asceticism, complete renunciation to the point where he got so sick. His body was so sick from a lack of food and nourishment that he had to be nourished back into health by the great Saint Sujata in the text. Sujata brought the Buddha's health back through a mixture of rice and milk. And he regained his strength and realized, okay, extremes are not the answer. How do I cultivate the middle path? Let's keep that question alive as we look into the world. We see what's happening out there, whether it's in our government or what's happening elsewhere. Um, what is the middle path here between the differences that maybe is more helpful? And can that inform then how I show up? Will that inform sort of my showing up, my responding? I think of it almost in three ways. I was sitting with this before we logged on tonight. Being a receiver, a perceiver, and a responder. This is another way we can think of it. That first, we have to have the capacity to listen deeply to what is happening or to others, yeah, without filling the space with our preconceived ideas about anything, but really being a listener and an empathetic listener. And then the perceiving here is really the endeavor of non-duality. So if what we're perceiving is fear, we're going to know more about how we can respond if we choose to respond. We're not always obligated to, but um, listening here is really attuning to what's the heart of the matter for this person. Some of you might remember I've used the example of this gentleman when I was a chaplain at a cancer hospital at Dana-Farber, who was an extreme Republican. This was during the Obama era. And, some of you know I'm a lifelong Democrat, liberal. This is how I roll. A huge Obama supporter. Um, I kind of wish Michelle would run for president, but hey, that's probably not going to happen. uh, and this gentleman, who was from Ukraine originally, was extreme conservative Republican, was bashing Obama constantly. In our sessions, we were doing counseling sessions, and I was kind of trying to get beyond my own reactions and stuff. But what I really attuned to was this man is terrified. He is afraid of the world being out of control. He's afraid of the world being different. Um, and somehow the chaos that he was afraid of was right there knocking at the door. And we could actually then dive in. And I reflected this back to him that his fear was really sort of dictating his political views and all. And he agreed with me. He said, absolutely. So we could then move from not agreeing on anything on the political front to really attending to his worries, his fears for his kids and his grandkids and all of that. That became the essence of our meeting. And eventually he thanked me. He actually said, thank you, you have changed me, which was huge. After working together for 2 years, some little acknowledgement was helpful. Anyway, I'm not tooting my own horn, but it is possible. That's the point. It is possible. But part of that is attuning to that which is beyond the apparent positions that we take on things and really seeing the humanity there. So that's the role of the perceiver. And then how we show up changes. The responder, the one who says, okay, I think I know how to respond to this from insight. This is, after all, why we practice mindfulness, that fourth stage of mindfulness, which is what are my patterns of perceiving and reacting, and what else is there? What else is there besides that habitual reactive habit pattern? And it's so easy to miss just this sense of clarity, this sense of awareness, this mindful awareness that is unchanging. So fear is a huge theme here, I think, and it disrupts the fear of chaos, disrupts our sense of reason, it disrupts discernment. And so part of this stage of discerning the middle way has to be neutrality on some level. And neutrality is not accepting necessarily being resigned to things, but it's within us, allowing the reactivity to just settle a bit so we can get some kind of perspective. It allows us to feel everything rather than feeling nothing. And this is one of the things about neutrality that often gets missed. It's not an unfeeling dispassion, but rather neutrality makes way, it makes room to feel everything that's happening and give us some stability in the midst of it. So it's not just the bad stuff, but all the truths, the fullness, as well as bringing, as we did tonight, bringing some suchness into the ripples that come. You know? So this is, I think, sort of just a way to sort of spark questions and dialogue, I think, around how can we actually make lasting change, both with for ourselves and also then respond in the world, without just the rhetoric, but also the sense of bringing a middle way into our solutions, into our responses. Not always easy when we're talking about systems and things on that level. So one last thing I'm going to read, and then we can sort of open it up and we can bring it to a close. Good night, Almastella. Be well. Whoop, she just vanished. Okay. This is a piece I wrote. I'm working on two books right now. Um, so it's going slowly because it takes time to write one, much less two. But this is a book on impermanence. I'm writing on the four seals and working with change. And the triangles exercise I mentioned is going to be part of that as well. There is this thing called the indivisibility of awareness. So in Dzogchen, we find the sense, there's this notion of shunyata, which is often translated as emptiness or a mind that is profoundly open. So emptiness is a little misleading, that term, but it's profoundness in openness and luminosity or just pristine clarity. And these two are seen as distinct qualities, and yet they both reflect the same experience. Um, and then compassion is that which permeates these as well. So emptiness, luminosity, compassion, the three kind of pinnacles really of Dzogchen practice. So what I'm writing here is about this indivisibility of awareness. The indivisibility of awareness is the changeless state. One is no longer in duality. After all, we are resting in the non-dual awareness of open presence. And one is no longer in motion. The stillness at the center no longer has movement, and thus the cycle stops, even for a moment. And time gives way to timeless awareness. Thus, the eternal present becomes our home. This is the timeless, deathless state. We abide here in that which is deeper and changeless, this transcendent and boundless quality that is both awake and ultimately immortal. So, part of what we're talking about today is this indivisibility of awareness, this non duality, this capacity to simply hold all truths at once. Um, Resting in non dual awareness so that our one pointed awareness opens up to no pointed awareness. So that mindful presence on breathing, on body, senses, ultimately, when we are experiencing the openness of awareness itself, we are no longer focusing it on any one thing, but we are simply open awareness itself. So, this is the quality of the indivisibility, the non duality, from which responding from creativity, immeasurable creativity, coming from this apparently blank canvas, whether it's writing music or painting pictures or writing poetry, which is why often on retreats, all of a sudden the poetry just starts flowing like a fountain, or music starts coming. It's just a wealth of creativity. This is where a lot of, I think, uh, solutions, resolutions come when we are resting in non judgment. The non judgment that otherwise colonizes our minds is now free. And deeper answers and the middle way itself becomes more revealed to us. The second part of this we'll look at next week, the motion part, because the next stage is stillness, a sense of equanimity and stillness.